Hi, this is David Panush of the Edmund Burke School, and this is another video lecture for Stumbling on Happiness by Dan Gilbert. This is chapter 3 in the section called Subjectivity. The title of the chapter is Outside Looking In, and it's all about how can we measure happiness. So to begin with, Gilbert sets up a lot of information before he gets to the answer. So just keep that in mind as you're reading. He begins talking about physiological arousal and this idea that we can have reactions in our body that happen and we don't actually know what they mean. That we can be experiencing the world and our body is reacting without being aware of our experiences or aware of what those experiences actually mean to ourselves. And we go through much of our day in this fashion, right? Like experiencing, not reflecting, not paying attention internally to know what those experiences mean to us or how we feel about them. So he gives an example of this experiment on this bridge in Vancouver. I provided you with a visual. Don't know if it's the same exact bridge, where they surveyed participants either on the bridge or after the bridge. And the survey was irrelevant. And then they asked the participants later, would they call the survey, the lab people, the experimenters back after the fact. And they surveyed only men, and the survey person doing the survey was a young, relatively attractive woman. And what they found was people who took the survey in the middle of the bridge, subjects who took the survey in the middle of the bridge were significantly more likely to call the experimenters back later. And the theory here is that in the middle of the bridge, what their body was telling them physiologically is that they were experiencing physiological arousal due to fear, subconscious fear of being in a high place, right? But that same exact physiological response is what your body does when you're attracted to somebody or liking somebody. So they experienced the physical arousal, physiological arousal, misattributed it because they weren't paying attention to it, misattributed it to the person they were speaking with rather than the fact that they were in the middle of the bridge. And what this means for measuring happiness is you can't really be too happy with asking people, well, are you happy or were you happy when this thing happened? Because most people aren't actually paying attention to how they're feeling at any given moment. If I said, right now, how are you feeling? You'd have to stop, check, and say, well, how am I feeling? So most of us just don't go through our days aware of how we are actually feeling about the events that are happening around us. So that's challenge number one. So Gilbert basically says there's no such thing as a happyometer, but how can we as scientists proceed to measure it in some fashion? And we just talked about the problem of awareness. The second problem, he doesn't talk about that much in the chapter, but he'll talk about much more detail later in the book. And this is the idea that, and it's sort of related, not only are we bad at knowing whether or not we're happy right now, we're really bad at remembering whether or not we were happy at some point in the past, because chances are we weren't paying attention. Not to mention, as you'll learn, memory is extremely unreliable. So first problem is people aren't aware. Second problem, people don't remember correctly. Third problem is subjectivity, and Gilbert talked about this in the last chapter, which is this basic idea that, okay, I'm trying to measure something in people, but everybody sees it differently. So you are happy in one situation, I'm happy in a different situation that makes you unhappy. How could we possibly measure whether or not that situation makes people happy? So that there's a real problem there. So now he's going to present the solutions after working through the problems. So let's look at the problems and the solutions. So on page 41, and he repeats this later in the chapter, he says the gold standard for measuring happiness or any subjective experience, emotional experience, you could use this to measure sadness or anger or whatever, is the honest, real-time report of the attentive individual. So why do we need them to be attentive? Because most of the time people aren't paying attention. So we need to say, hey, pay attention to your emotions, because most people don't. The second thing we need is we need it as much as possible in real time. I have to ask you right now, pay attention. How are you feeling? And at that moment, I'll solve two of the problems with measuring. In other words, I won't rely on memory because I'm asking you while you're experiencing the thing, the movie or the game or the pain or whatever, how are you feeling right now? Please pay attention to it. So that's part of it. But now we haven't solved the problem of subjectivity. We still have a problem with the fact that everybody, even if they're paying attention and giving you responses right in the moment, will say things different responses. They won't all be the same type of happiness or level. This is where the law of large numbers comes in. So in other words, if I only measure 2 people, does this chocolate cake make you happy? And their responses are different. I don't know that much. But if I can measure 1,000 people or 10,000 people, then I know pretty close on average, which isn't exactly the same as saying that this will apply to every human being, but I know that more often than not, chocolate cake makes people happy. Or more often than not, chocolate cake makes people happier than eating sawdust, right? So I can make pretty valid, reliable scientific comparisons because I've sort of pushed, evened out all that subjectivity by measuring many, many different people. And yeah, of course, there are going to be the outliers, the people who are made really, really happy by this thing or not made happy by it at all. But the bulk of the people in any large distribution are going to be in the middle. And we can then say with some confidence what makes people happy and what doesn't make people happy. So problems: awareness, memory, subjectivity. Solutions: ask people to pay attention, measure it in real time if you can, and measure as many people as possible. There you have it.